The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1882, sealed with red wax that bore the imprint of the Territorial Bank. And when Clara Fontaine broke it open with trembling fingers, she discovered that her husband Thomas had left her nothing but dust, broken dreams, and debts that stretched higher than the mountains surrounding their ranch in Butte, Montana. She stood on the porch of the small timber house Thomas had built with his own hands 5 years earlier, the paper shaking in her grip as she read the numbers again and again, hoping they would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. $3,000 owed to the bank. Another $800 to the feed store in town. $200 to the blacksmith. Smaller amounts scattered among various creditors like breadcrumbs leading into a dark forest. Thomas had been dead only 3 weeks, killed when his horse spooked during a thunderstorm and threw him against the rocky outcropping near the north pasture. He had died instantly, the doctor said, which was supposed to be a mercy. Clara was 24 years old and suddenly alone in a world that had no patience for widowed women with empty pockets. She walked down the porch steps and across the dusty yard toward the barn, her black mourning dress dragging through the dirt. The October wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow from the mountains. Inside the barn, she counted the cattle that represented her only remaining assets. 43 head of healthy beef cattle, each one worth approximately $70 at current market prices. She did the arithmetic in her head, a skill her father had insisted she learn despite her mother's protests that it was unladylike. 43 times 70 equaled just over $3,000. Enough to pay the bank, but nothing left for the other creditors, and certainly nothing to live on through the winter. Clara pressed her forehead against the rough wood of a stall door and allowed herself exactly 1 minute of tears. Then she dried her eyes with the back of her hand, straightened her spine, and began planning. She would sell the cattle one at a time, stretching out the payments to the various creditors while keeping enough animals to maintain the appearance of a working ranch. If she was careful, if she was smart, if she was lucky, she might be able to hold on until spring, when she could figure out what came next. The first cow went to pay the undertaker who had prepared Thomas for burial. Clara led the animal into town herself, walking the 5 miles because she needed to save the horse for more important work. The undertaker accepted the cow with obvious reluctance, clearly preferring cash, but he took it nonetheless and marked her account as settled. Clara walked home in the fading afternoon light, her feet aching, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had 42 more transactions ahead of her. Over the following weeks, she developed a routine. Each time a creditor demanded payment, she would select a cow from her dwindling herd and drive it to town. The feed store owner took 3 cattle for the grain Thomas had purchased on credit. The blacksmith took 1 for the horseshoes and repairs that remained unpaid. The general store owner, a thin-lipped woman named Mrs. Henshaw who had never shown Clara any warmth, took 2 cows for various household items Thomas had charged to their account. By late November, Clara had 29 cattle remaining, and the bank was growing impatient. The banker, a portly man named Chester Higgins, sent increasingly stern letters demanding that she settle the mortgage on the property. Clara wrote back explaining her plan to pay the debt gradually through cattle sales, but Higgins replied that he required immediate payment in full, or he would be forced to foreclose on the ranch. Clara sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the letter by lamplight, trying to imagine where she would go if she lost the ranch. She had no family left in Montana. Her parents had died from influenza 2 years after she married Thomas, and her only brother had moved to San Francisco to work in shipping. She could write to him, ask for help, but pride stuck in her throat like a bone. Thomas had promised her a good life out west. She would not admit defeat so easily. The next morning, she rose before dawn and began the work of running the ranch alone. She fed the remaining cattle, mended a section of fence that had come loose in the wind, hauled water from the creek, and chopped enough wood to keep the house warm through the coming cold snap. Her hands, once soft and well kept, had become calloused and rough. Her arms ached constantly from the physical labor, but she refused to give up. She was carrying an armload of firewood toward the house when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Clara set down the wood and shaded her eyes against the low winter sun. A lone rider was coming up the road from town, sitting easy in his saddle on a tall roan horse. As he drew closer, she saw that he was young, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He wore the clothes of a working cattleman, trail-worn but clean, and he rode with the relaxed confidence of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. The rider dismounted a respectful distance from the house and removed his hat, revealing a tanned face with clear blue eyes and a firm jawline. "Good morning, madam. I hope I am not intruding. My name is Samuel Easton. I have been working cattle drives between Texas and Montana for the past 10 years, and I am looking to settle in this area. I heard in town that you might have some cattle for sale." Clara studied him carefully, searching his face for signs of the pity or condescension she had grown accustomed to seeing in the eyes of the townspeople. She found neither. Samuel Easton looked at her with straightforward honesty, his gaze steady and calm. "I do have cattle," she said slowly, "but I am only selling them one at a time as I need to settle my debts. I am not in a position to sell the entire herd." Samuel nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "I understand, madam. The thing is, I have been saving my wages for years, and I have enough put aside to start my own operation. I need cattle to do that. If you are willing to sell, I am willing to buy at full market price. $70 a head, cash money." Clara felt her heart begin to pound. $70 was indeed full price, more than she had been getting from the various creditors in town who knew she was desperate and had negotiated accordingly. "How many head are you looking to buy?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level. "However many you are willing to sell," Samuel replied. "I saw your herd as I rode up. They look healthy and well cared for. I would be proud to add them to my own stock." Clara's mind raced through the calculations. 29 head at $70 each would give her $2,030, enough to make a substantial payment to the bank and cover all her other remaining debts. But it would also leave her with no cattle at all, no means of making a living. She hesitated, torn between immediate relief and long-term survival. Samuel seemed to sense her uncertainty. "I do not mean to pressure you, Mrs. Fontaine. May I water my horse while you think it over?" "Yes, of course. The trough is by the barn." Clara watched as he led his horse away, his movements efficient and gentle with the animal. She returned to the house and pulled out the letters from her creditors, spreading them across the kitchen table. The numbers stared back at her, unforgiving and absolute. When Samuel returned from watering his horse, Clara had made her decision. "I can sell you 20 head," she said. "I need to keep some for myself to maintain the ranch." Samuel nodded slowly. "That is fair. 20 head at $70 comes to $1,400. But if I may be so bold, Mrs. Fontaine, keeping 9 cattle on a ranch this size will not be enough to make a living. You would need at least 50 head to run a proper operation, and you would need help with the work besides." "I am aware of the challenges," Clara said stiffly, feeling her cheeks warm, "but I must make do with what I have. Of course, I meant no disrespect." Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out $1,400 bills, an amount of cash Clara had rarely seen in one place, and handed them to her. "When would you like me to collect the cattle? You can take them now if you like. I will help you cut out 20 head from the herd." They worked together for the next 2 hours, moving cattle through the gates and separating out the animals Clara had selected. Samuel knew his business well, anticipating the movements of the cattle and working his horse with subtle shifts of weight and pressure. Clara found herself watching him with grudging respect. He treated the animals with care, never rushing or shouting, and he spoke to them in a low, calm voice that kept them settled. When the 20 head were separated and ready to drive, Samuel secured them in the temporary pen near the barn. "I will come back tomorrow with some help to move them to my place," he said. "I have been renting the old Morrison property about 10 miles north of here." Clara knew the property. It was good grazing land with a decent house and barn, bigger than her own spread. "You have done well for yourself, Mr. Easton, to afford such a place after working cattle drives." "I lived frugally and saved every penny," Samuel said. He put his hat back on and gathered his horse's reins. "Mrs. Fontaine, I hope you do not think me too forward, but if you ever need help with the ranch work, I would be glad to lend a hand. Neighbors should help each other in this country." Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest, something she could not quite name. "That is kind of you, Mr. Easton. But I can manage on my own." "I am sure you can," Samuel said, and there was no trace of doubt in his voice, "but the offer stands regardless." He mounted his horse in one smooth motion and touched his fingers to his hat brim. "Good day, Mrs. Fontaine." Clara watched him ride away until he disappeared down the road toward town. Then she went inside and counted the money again, smoothing each bill carefully before adding it to the stack. $1,400. It was more money than she had held in her hand since her wedding day, when Thomas had shown her their combined savings and promised her they would build something lasting together. The next morning, she drove into Butte with the money tucked securely in her bag. The town was busy with the usual commerce of a growing Montana settlement. Ore wagons rumbled down the main street from the copper mines that gave Butte its prosperity. Cowboys from the surrounding ranches lounged outside the saloons. Women in their best dresses picked their way carefully along the wooden sidewalks, avoiding the mud and horse droppings. Clara went first to the bank, where Chester Higgins received her in his private office. She placed $900 on his desk, the amount required to bring her mortgage payments current and buy herself 3 more months before the next payment came due. Higgins counted the bills twice, his eyebrows rising with each count, clearly surprised that she had managed to secure such a sum. "This is most irregular, Mrs. Fontaine," he said, his jowls quivering slightly as he spoke. "Most irregular indeed. May I ask where you obtained this money?" "I sold cattle, Mr. Higgins, at full market price." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "You will find that is $900 exactly. I trust that will satisfy the bank's immediate concerns." Higgins pursed his lips but could find no fault with her payment. He wrote out a receipt with elaborate care, signed it with a flourish, and handed it across the desk. "Yes, well, that will suffice for now. But do understand that the bank will expect regular payments going forward. We cannot continue to show such flexibility." Clara took the receipt and folded it carefully into her bag. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Higgins. Good day." She left the bank feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The oppressive weight of the largest debt was now manageable, at least temporarily. She spent the rest of the morning settling her smaller accounts around town. She paid off the remaining balance at the feed store, gave the blacksmith his final payment, and squared her account at the general store. By noon, She had spent all but $50 of Samuel Easton's money, but she was free of debt for the first time since Thomas died. Clara treated herself to lunch at the small restaurant next to the hotel, a luxury she had not permitted in months. She ordered pot roast with potatoes and carrots and ate slowly, savoring every bite. Through the window, she watched the life of the town flow past, people going about their business, everyone absorbed in their own struggles and triumphs. She was finishing her coffee when she saw Samuel Easton ride past with 2 other cowboys. They were driving the 20 head of cattle she had sold him, moving them carefully through the busy street. Samuel sat tall in his saddle, his attention focused on the cattle, ensuring they did not spook or scatter among the wagons and pedestrians. As the small herd passed the restaurant, Samuel glanced through the window and caught Clara's eye. He smiled, touched his hat, and then returned his attention to the cattle. Clara found herself smiling back even though he could no longer see her. There was something about Samuel Easton that settled her nerves, something solid and trustworthy in the way he carried himself. She finished her coffee and paid her bill, then headed back to the ranch with a lighter heart than she had carried in a long time. The first snow came in early December, blanketing the ranch in 6 inches of white silence. Clara worked harder than ever to keep her remaining 9 cattle fed and sheltered. She hauled hay from the barn twice a day, broke ice on the water trough every morning, and made sure the animals had adequate protection from the bitter wind that swept down from the mountains. One afternoon, as she was struggling to lift a bale of hay onto the feeding platform, she heard a horse approaching. She turned to see Samuel Easton riding into her yard, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. He dismounted and walked toward her, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Fontaine. I was passing by on my way back from town and thought I would check to see if you needed anything." Clara set down the hay bale and wiped her hands on her work apron. "That is thoughtful of you, Mr. Easton, but as I told you before, I can manage on my own." "I can see that you are managing admirably," Samuel said, his tone gentle. "But I also see that you are working yourself to exhaustion. There is no shame in accepting help from a neighbor." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, but the truth was that she was exhausted. Her arms ached from lifting hay bales. Her back hurt from chopping wood. Her hands were cracked and bleeding from the constant exposure to cold and rough work. "I suppose I could use some help getting the rest of these hay bales distributed," she admitted reluctantly. Samuel smiled, and Clara noticed for the first time that he had a dimple in his left cheek. "I would be happy to help." He removed his heavy coat and went to work, lifting the hay bales as if they weighed nothing and distributing them efficiently among the feeding stations. Clara watched him work, noting the easy strength in his movements, the care he took to ensure each bale was properly placed. When the work was finished, Samuel returned to his pack horse and unloaded several items. "I brought you some supplies from town. Extra lamp oil, some dried beans, coffee, and flour. I thought you might be running low." Clara felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Mr. Easton, I cannot accept charity." "It is not charity," Samuel said quickly. "Consider it a trade. You sold me fine cattle at a fair price. I am returning the favor by helping a neighbor. That is how communities survive out here, Mrs. Fontaine. We help each other." Clara looked at the supplies, then at Samuel's honest face and felt her resistance crumble. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your kindness more than I can say." They carried the supplies into the house together, and Clara put on a pot of coffee to warm them both. As they sat at the kitchen table, cups cradled in their cold hands, Samuel told her about his life on the cattle drives. He described endless days in the saddle, river crossings where cattle and men both risked drowning, thunderstorms that turned the herds into stampeding chaos, and quiet nights under stars so bright they looked like holes poked in the fabric of the sky. "Why did you decide to settle here?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. "After all those years of wandering, why but?" Samuel gazed into his coffee cup as if seeking the answer there. "I grew tired of never having a place to call home. Every season we would drive the cattle north, deliver them, collect our pay, and head back south to do it all over again. I watched other men build ranches, raise families, put down roots. I wanted that for myself. I wanted something permanent." "And you chose Montana," Clara said. "I chose Montana because it is beautiful and wild and full of possibility," Samuel said, meeting her eyes. "And because I believe a man can make something of himself here if he is willing to work hard." "A woman too," Clara said quietly. "A woman too," Samuel agreed. "Especially a woman as determined as you are, Mrs. Fontaine." They talked for another hour, and Clara found herself sharing stories about her own life. She told Samuel about growing up in a small farming community in Illinois, about meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 19, about the adventure and romance of moving west to start a new life. She talked about the early years of their marriage when everything had seemed possible, before the debts began to accumulate and Thomas grew distant and worried. "He was a good man," Clara said, staring out the window at the snow-covered yard. "He just had terrible luck. Bad investments, cattle that died from disease, a hay crop that failed 2 years running. The debts piled up faster than he could pay them down. I think the stress of it all contributed to his accident. He was distracted, not paying attention the way he should have been." "I am sorry for your loss," Samuel said, and his sympathy sounded genuine. "It must be very difficult to lose your husband and face such financial burden at the same time." "I am managing," Clara said, straightening her shoulders. "I will continue to manage." Samuel nodded and stood to leave. "I have no doubt of that, Mrs. Fontaine. But please remember that you do not have to manage alone. I am only 10 miles away if you need anything." After he left, Clara sat at the table for a long time, thinking about Samuel Easton and the unexpected kindness he had shown her. She was not accustomed to accepting help, had always prided herself on her self-sufficiency. But there was something about Samuel that made it easier to let down her guard. He did not treat her with pity or condescension. He simply offered help as one equal to another, with no expectation of anything in return. The winter deepened, and Samuel began stopping by the ranch once or twice a week. Sometimes he brought supplies from town. Other times he helped with heavy chores like chopping wood or repairing the barn roof where snow had caused a section to sag. He never stayed long and never imposed on Clara's hospitality, but his presence became a welcome part of her routine. In January, a severe cold snap hit the area, with temperatures dropping to 20 below zero for a week straight. Clara's 9 remaining cattle huddled in the barn for warmth, and she spent her days hauling water from the house to keep them hydrated. The creek had frozen solid, and breaking through the ice required a pickaxe and considerable strength. On the 3rd day of the cold snap, Samuel arrived with his 2 hired hands and a wagon full of hay. "I heard in town that this cold spell is expected to last another few days," he said. "I thought you might need extra feed to keep your cattle comfortable." Clara was too grateful to protest. Together they distributed the hay and broke through the ice on the water trough. One of Samuel's hired hands, a young man named Pete, injured his hand when the pickaxe slipped. Clara brought him into the house and bandaged the wound, cleaning it carefully and wrapping it in clean cloth. "You have a gentle touch, Mrs. Fontaine," Pete said, wincing only slightly as she worked. "You would make a fine nurse." My mother taught me basic medical care, Clara said. She believed every woman should know how to tend the sick and injured. When the work was finished and the hired hands had ridden back to Samuel's ranch, Samuel lingered on the porch. "Clara," he said, using her first name for the first time, "may I speak plainly with you?" Clara felt her pulse quicken at the sound of her name on his lips. "Of course. I have been thinking about your situation here. 9 cattle are not enough to sustain a working ranch, and you cannot continue to do all this work alone. The physical labor will wear you down eventually, and when spring comes, you will need to plant hay crops and manage calving and a dozen other tasks that require more than one person." Samuel paused, choosing his words carefully. "I would like to propose a business arrangement." Clara felt a strange mixture of disappointment and curiosity. "What kind of business arrangement?" "I will buy your remaining 9 cattle at full market price, $630. That will give you enough money to pay the bank through the spring and have some left over for living expenses. In exchange, you would lease your grazing land to me. I would pay you $50 a month for the use of the land, and I would maintain the property, handle all the cattle work, and ensure the place stays in good condition. You would continue to live in the house, of course. This would simply be an arrangement that benefits us both." Clara considered the proposal carefully. It was generous, perhaps too generous. "Why would you do this? You already have the Morrison property with plenty of grazing land." "I am planning to expand my herd significantly," Samuel said. "I can use the additional pasture. And truthfully, Clara, I do not like seeing you work yourself to exhaustion trying to maintain a ranch alone. This way, you would have financial security and I would have the land I need. Everyone benefits." Clara studied his face, searching for hidden motives or ulterior purposes. She saw only honest concern and straightforward business sense. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." Samuel put on his hat and prepared to mount his horse, "But do not take too long. Spring will be here before you know it, and decisions become more difficult when you are desperate." That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with all her financial papers spread before her. She calculated and recalculated, trying to find a way to make the ranch work on her own. But every path led to the same conclusion. Samuel was right. 9 cattle were not enough. She would slowly go bankrupt trying to maintain a property she could not properly operate alone. But accepting Samuel's offer felt like admitting defeat, like giving up on the dream she and Thomas had shared. The ranch was supposed to be their legacy, proof that they could build something lasting in this wild country. Letting it go, even partially, felt like betraying Thomas's memory. She went to bed with no clear answer but woke the next morning with sudden clarity. Thomas was dead. The dream they had shared had died with him. She could either cling to a past that no longer existed, or she could adapt to her new reality and find a way to survive. The ranch would still be hers, the land would still be in her name, but she would have help managing it. There was no shame in that. There was only practicality and survival. When Samuel stopped by 2 days later, Clara was ready with her answer. "I accept your proposal," she said, "but I want the arrangement put in writing, drawn up by a lawyer, so everything is legal and proper." Samuel's face broke into a wide smile. "Absolutely. We will go into town tomorrow and have papers drawn up. You will not regret this, Clara. I promise you that." They rode into Butte together the next morning, side by side on their horses, the cold January sun glinting off the snow. Clara felt self-conscious riding next to Samuel, aware of the way people watched them pass, the speculative looks and whispered comments. A widow and a bachelor spending time together would naturally inspire gossip, especially in a town as small as Butte. At the lawyer's office, they spent 2 hours working out the details of their agreement. The lawyer, a precise man named Thaddeus Moreland, drew up a contract that specified the terms of the cattle sale, the land lease, and the responsibilities of both parties. Clara read every word carefully before signing, and Samuel did the same. When they were finished, Moreland witnessed both signatures and made copies for each of them. "This is a sound business arrangement," Moreland said, handing them their respective copies. "I wish more of my clients approached their dealings with such clear-headed practicality." Samuel paid for the lawyer's services, and they left the office together. As they walked down the street toward the livery stable where they had left their horses, Samuel said, "Would you do me the honor of joining me for lunch, Clara? I know a restaurant that serves excellent steak." Clara hesitated, aware that sharing a meal with Samuel would add fuel to the gossip fire. But she was hungry, and she found that she wanted to spend more time with him. "Yes, I would like that." They ate at the Silver Star restaurant, a nicer establishment than Clara usually frequented. The steaks were indeed excellent, thick and juicy, served with roasted potatoes and winter vegetables. Over the meal, Samuel told her about his plans for expanding his herd, his hope to eventually run 500 head of cattle across both properties. "That is ambitious," Clara said, impressed despite herself. "I believe in setting ambitious goals," Samuel replied. "A man should always be reaching for something beyond what he already has. Otherwise, what is the point of working so hard? What is the point?" Clara asked, genuinely curious about his philosophy. Samuel set down his fork and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The point is to build something that matters, something that lasts beyond your own life. A ranch that will still be here in 50 years, 100 years. A family that will carry on your name and values, a legacy of hard work and integrity. And you think you can build all that here in Montana?" "I know I can," Samuel said with quiet confidence. "The only question is whether I will have someone to share it with." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks and she looked down at her plate, suddenly flustered. "I am sure you will find someone," she said quietly. "A successful rancher like you will have no shortage of interested women." "I am not interested in just any woman," Samuel said, his voice low. "I am interested in a woman of strength and courage, a woman who does not give up when life becomes difficult, a woman who can be a true partner in building something lasting." Clara met his eyes and saw the unspoken question there. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a rush of conflicting emotions. She was drawn to Samuel in a way she had not expected, attracted to his kindness and strength and steady reliability. But Thomas had been dead less than 3 months. Was it too soon to even consider the possibility of caring for another man? "Samuel, she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Forgive me. I am moving too fast. You have been through a terrible loss and you need time to grieve. I should not have spoken so boldly." He smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I hope I have not made you uncomfortable." "You have not," Clara said honestly. "You have just surprised me. I did not expect to feel." She trailed off, unable to find the right words. "We do not have to define anything right now," Samuel said gently. "Let us simply be neighbors and friends. The rest will work itself out in time or it will not. Either way, I value your company and your friendship." They finished their meal and rode back to Clara's ranch together, the conversation flowing easily despite the emotional undercurrents. When they arrived, Samuel helped her stable her horse and then mounted his own to head home. "I will come by next week with a crew to collect the cattle," he said. "And I will bring you the $630 in cash. Thank you, Samuel, for everything." "No thanks needed. We are partners now, Clara. Partners help each other. Over the following weeks, Clara began to adjust to her new situation. Samuel collected the 9 cattle and paid her in full. He also brought a small herd of his own cattle to graze on her land, fulfilling his part of their agreement. Several times a week, he or one of his hired hands would stop by to check on the property and handle any issues that arose. Clara found herself looking forward to Samuel's visits with an eagerness that both pleased and worried her. She began taking more care with her appearance on the days she expected him, pinning her hair more carefully and wearing her better dresses instead of her usual work clothes. She baked bread and pies, always having something fresh to offer when he arrived. One afternoon in late February, Samuel brought a wagon load of lumber to the ranch. "I noticed your porch steps are rotting," he said. "I thought I would replace them before someone gets hurt." Clara watched as he worked, his strong hands measuring and cutting and nailing with practiced efficiency. She brought him lemonade and fresh bread with butter, and they talked while he worked. The conversation ranged from cattle prices to politics to the books they had read as children. Clara discovered that Samuel had an unexpectedly well-educated mind, with opinions about literature and history that matched her own interests. "How did a cattle driver become so well-read?" she asked, genuinely curious. Samuel paused in his hammering and wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold air. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She insisted that all her children learn to read and write well. I carried books with me on every cattle drive, reading by firelight after the day's work was done. It helped pass the lonely nights and kept my mind sharp." "What kind of books?" Clara asked. "Everything I could get my hands on. Shakespeare, Dickens, Mark Twain. History books about the Roman Empire and the American Revolution. Even some poetry, though I will admit I did not always understand it." Clara found herself smiling. "I love poetry. My father used to read Wordsworth and Keats aloud to the family on Sunday evenings." "Recite something for me," Samuel said, returning to his work on the steps. Clara felt suddenly shy, but she took a breath and recited from memory. "She walks in beauty, like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that is best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." Samuel stopped hammering and looked up at her, his blue eyes intense. "Lord Byron," he said softly. "That is beautiful, the poem and the recitation both." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Clara felt something shift between them, some invisible barrier crumbling. She looked away first, flustered by the strength of her own feelings. When the steps were finished, Samuel tested them carefully to ensure they were solid. "That should last you for many years," he said. "No more worrying about falling through rotten wood." "Thank you, Samuel. You have done so much for me. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "I do not want repayment," Samuel said, moving closer to her. "I want—" He stopped himself and stepped back. "I should go. I have work waiting at home." After he left, Clara sat on the new porch steps and allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Samuel Easton. Despite her grief for Thomas, despite the short time since his death, despite all the practical reasons why she should guard her heart, she was falling for the kind cowboy who had appeared in her life when she needed help most. But was it right to feel this way so soon? Would people think poorly of her for moving on from Thomas's death so quickly? Clara wrestled with these questions through the long evening, finding no easy answers. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass and muddy ground. The creek ran high with runoff from the mountains. Clara's spirits lifted with the changing season, hope returning after the long, dark winter. Samuel came by on a warm afternoon to check on the property, as he had been doing regularly. But this time he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his hat and struggling to meet Clara's eyes. "Is something wrong?" Clara asked, concerned. "No, nothing wrong. Clara, I need to speak with you about something important." Samuel took a deep breath. "I know it has only been a few months since Thomas died. I know people will talk and judge, but I cannot keep my feelings hidden any longer. I have fallen in love with you, Clara Fontaine. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you refuse to give up no matter how difficult things become. I love your intelligence and your kindness. I love the way you recite poetry and the way you care for injured cowboys, and the way you stand up to bankers who try to intimidate you." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Samuel, please, let me finish," Samuel said, his voice shaking slightly. "I am not asking you to forget Thomas or to stop grieving. I am just asking if there might be room in your heart someday for someone else. For me, I will wait as long as you need. I will court you properly and give you all the time you need to be sure of your feelings. I just need to know if there is any hope for us." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, there is hope. Because I have fallen in love with you too, Samuel. I did not expect it. I did not plan for it. But my heart does not seem to care about my plans or my expectations." Samuel's face transformed with joy. He stepped forward and took her hands in his, holding them gently as if they were precious treasures. "Clara, you have made me the happiest man in Montana." "People will talk," Clara warned. "They will say terrible things about both of us." "Let them talk," Samuel said fiercely. "I do not care about gossip. I only care about you and building a life together." He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, but Clara did not want to pull away. She wanted to feel his lips on hers, wanted to experience the joy and comfort of being held by someone who truly cared for her. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, full of promise and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Samuel rested his forehead against hers and said, "I will court you properly. I will do everything right and honorable. I will not rush you into anything before you are ready." "I know you will," Clara said, touching his cheek with her hand. "You are the most honorable man I have ever known." True to his word, Samuel courted Clara with old-fashioned propriety over the following months. He called on her regularly, always arriving at respectable hours and never staying late into the evening. He brought her flowers from the meadows, books he thought she might enjoy, and small gifts that showed he paid attention to her interests and preferences. They took long walks around the property, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel shared his dreams for the future, his plans to build an even bigger house on his property, his hope for children and a family. Clara shared her own dreams, which had changed and evolved since Thomas's death. She no longer wanted just survival. She wanted a true partnership, a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The gossip was intense, as Clara had predicted. People in town whispered behind their hands when Clara and Samuel walked down the street together. Mrs. Henshaw, the general store owner, made pointed comments about the proper mourning period for widows. Even the minister, a stern man named Reverend Caldwell, felt compelled to offer Clara unsolicited advice about maintaining her reputation. But Clara discovered that she did not care as much as she thought she would. She had spent so many months worrying about what others thought, trying to maintain appearances and meet expectations. Now, with Samuel's love supporting her, she found the courage to live according to her own values rather than society's arbitrary rules. In May, Samuel proposed formally, presenting Clara with a gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. They were sitting on the new porch steps he had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and pink. "Clara Fontaine, will you marry me?" Samuel asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you be my wife and my partner in all things? Will you help me build the legacy I have been dreaming of?" "Yes," Clara said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Easton. I will be proud to be your wife." They married in June 1883, exactly 8 months after Thomas's death. The ceremony was small and simple, held at the ranch with only a few close friends in attendance. Clara wore a cream-colored dress rather than traditional white, a nod to her status as a widow remarrying. Samuel wore a new suit he had purchased specially for the occasion, looking handsome and nervous as the minister spoke the words that would bind them together. When Reverend Caldwell pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Clara with such tenderness that several guests wiped away tears. Clara felt a sense of profound rightness, as if all the suffering and struggle of the past year had been leading her to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. After the ceremony, they held a simple reception with food and music. Samuel's hired hands played fiddles and guitars, filling the air with lively dance tunes. Clara danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around the yard, her cream dress twirling around her legs. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom in Samuel's house, they came together as husband and wife. Samuel was patient and tender, taking his time to ensure Clara's comfort and pleasure. Clara had been nervous, worried that being with Samuel would feel like a betrayal of Thomas. But when Samuel held her in his arms, kissing her gently and murmuring words of love, all her doubts melted away. This was right. This was where she belonged. Clara moved into Samuel's house, bringing with her the few possessions she valued most. Her mother's china, her father's books, Thomas's pocket watch that she kept as a remembrance of the man who had first brought her west. Samuel welcomed all of it, understanding that Clara's past was part of who she was, not something to be erased or forgotten. They combined their operations, running cattle across both properties, and gradually building up the herd to the 500 head Samuel had dreamed of. Clara proved to be an excellent partner in the ranching business, with a head for numbers and organization that complemented Samuel's skills with cattle and land management. Together, they created something neither could have built alone. In September, Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she told Samuel the news, he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Clara, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to describe it," Samuel said, gently placing his hand on her still flat belly. "This is everything I have ever wanted. A wife I love, a successful ranch, and now a child. I am the most blessed man in the world." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the physical demands of ranch life became increasingly difficult as her belly grew. But Samuel was attentive and protective, insisting that she rest more and leave the heavy work to him and the hired hands. In late February 1884, Clara went into labor during a fierce snowstorm. Samuel sent Pete racing through the storm to fetch the doctor from town, while he stayed with Clara, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The doctor arrived just in time to oversee the delivery of a healthy baby boy with strong lungs and a full head of dark hair like his father. They named him Thomas Samuel Easton, honoring both Clara's first husband and her current one. Samuel cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion as he looked down at the tiny face and perfect little fingers. "Thank you," he whispered to Clara. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for giving me a family." Clara watched her husband cradle their newborn son and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey from widow to wife, from debt to stability, from despair to hope, had been long and difficult. But it had led her to this moment, to this family, to this life she had never imagined possible when she first opened that devastating letter from the bank. The ranch prospered over the following years. Samuel's business instincts proved sound, and their herd grew steadily. They hired more hands to help with the work, including a young couple who lived in Clara's original house and helped manage the combined properties. The cattle operation became known throughout Montana for producing high-quality beef, and buyers came from as far away as Chicago to purchase their stock. Clara gave birth to 2 more children over the next 5 years. A daughter named Elizabeth in 1886, with Clara's green eyes and Samuel's dimpled smile. And another son named Matthew in 1888, who was born early and small but grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved following his father around the ranch. As the children grew, Samuel and Clara taught them the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion. They told the children stories about their family history, including how Clara and Samuel had met during a difficult time, how they had built their ranch from almost nothing, and how they had learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most challenging circumstances. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy with a natural talent for working with cattle. Elizabeth was creative and spirited, always singing and drawing pictures of the mountains and wildlife around the ranch. Matthew was the daredevil of the family, constantly climbing trees and exploring the wildest parts of the property, giving his parents many anxious moments. On their 10th wedding anniversary in June 1893, Samuel and Clara stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching their 3 children play in the yard. The original small timber house Clara had shared with Thomas was still standing on the northern property, preserved as a reminder of where she had started. The main house where they lived now was much larger, with room for the growing family and for the guests who frequently stayed with them. "Do you remember the day we met?" Samuel asked, putting his arm around Clara's waist. "Of course I remember," Clara said, leaning into his embrace. "You rode up offering to buy cattle from a desperate widow. I thought you were either a fool or a saint." "I was neither," Samuel said with a laugh. "I was just a man who recognized quality when I saw it, quality cattle and a quality woman." "You saved me," Clara said softly. "I was drowning in debt and despair, and you threw me a lifeline." Samuel turned her to face him, his expression serious. "No, Clara, you saved yourself. You had the courage to sell those cattle one at a time, to fight for your survival, to refuse to give up. I just happened to come along at the right moment. But you did the hard work. You made the difficult choices. You built this life as much as I did." Clara kissed her husband, grateful for his words and for the love that had sustained them through 10 years of marriage. "We built it together," she corrected. "Neither of us could have done it alone." "Together," Samuel agreed. "That is how it should be." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Clara reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had been a widow at 24, crushed by debt and seemingly without hope. But through determination, courage, and the love of a good man, she had not just survived but thrived. The cattle that she had sold one at a time to pay her dead husband's debts had been the beginning of her transformation. And the cowboy who had bought every head at full price had seen past her desperate circumstances to the strong, capable woman beneath. He had offered her not just a business arrangement but a partnership, not just financial security but love and respect. Their 3 children came running up to the porch, demanding their parents' attention. Thomas wanted to show his father a drawing of a bull he hoped to breed someday. Elizabeth had picked wildflowers for her mother and wanted them arranged in a vase. Matthew had caught a frog and needed someone to admire his prize. Samuel and Clara laughed and attended to each child in turn, giving them the love and attention they craved. Later, after the children were in bed, the couple sat together in the parlor, reading by lamplight and enjoying the peaceful quiet of the evening. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, noticing the contemplative expression on Clara's face. "I am thinking about how much life can change," Clara said. "How the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if you are brave enough to keep moving forward. How love can find you even when you are not looking for it. How a simple act of kindness can transform everything." "Your simple act of kindness in selling those cattle," Samuel teased gently. "No," Clara said, setting down her book and moving to sit beside him on the sofa. "Your simple act of kindness in offering full price to a widow who had nothing else to sell. You could have bargained me down. You could have taken advantage of my desperation, but you did not. You treated me with fairness and respect, and that made all the difference." Samuel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I told you before, I recognized quality when I saw it, and I was right. You are the best decision I ever made, Clara Easton." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamond dust. The cattle were settled in their pastures, the children safe in their beds, and the ranch that had almost bankrupted Clara now stood as a testament to what two people could build together when they combined their strengths and supported each other through hardship. Years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. A drought in 1894 tested their resources and management skills, but they adapted by digging new wells and moving cattle to better grazing areas. A harsh winter in 1896 killed some of their stock, but the herd was large enough to absorb the losses. Through it all, Samuel and Clara worked side by side, making decisions together and supporting each other through every difficulty. The children grew into capable young people who understood the value of the land and the importance of family. Thomas showed every sign of becoming an excellent rancher, with his father's calm temperament and his mother's sharp mind for business. Elizabeth developed a talent for breeding horses and began a successful side business raising and training quality stock. Matthew, despite his wild childhood, became a thoughtful young man who wanted to study veterinary medicine to help ranchers care for their animals. On a warm summer evening in 1900, the family gathered on the porch to celebrate Thomas Jr.'s 16th birthday. Clara watched her oldest son, now nearly a man, and marveled at how quickly time had passed. It seemed like just yesterday that she had been struggling to lift hay bales alone, wondering how she would survive the winter. Now she sat surrounded by family, on a thriving ranch with a husband who loved her deeply and children who made her proud. Samuel raised a glass of lemonade and a toast. "To Thomas, on his 16th birthday. May you grow into the kind of man who treats others with fairness and kindness, who works hard and dreams big, and who remembers that the greatest wealth is not measured in cattle or land but in love and family." Everyone drank to the toast, and then Elizabeth insisted they all dance. Pete, still working on the ranch after all these years, brought out his fiddle and played lively tunes while the family danced in the yard under the stars. Clara danced with each of her children and then with Samuel, who held her close and whispered in her ear, "I love you more today than I did the day we married." "How is that possible?" Clara asked, smiling up at him. "Because every day with you has given me more reasons to love you," Samuel said simply. Every challenge we have faced together, every joy we have shared, every quiet moment and every celebration has added layers to my love. It grows deeper and richer with time, like good wine or fine leather. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, moved by her husband's words. Even after 17 years together, he could still make her heart race and her breath catch. I love you too, Samuel, more than I ever thought possible. As the evening wore on and the children eventually went to bed, Samuel and Clara remained on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling night air. They talked about their plans for the ranch, their hopes for their children's futures, and their dreams for their own golden years. "Do you ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Marrying me so soon after Thomas died, having people gossip and judge." Clara considered the question seriously before answering. "No, not for a moment. You gave me a reason to hope when I thought hope was lost. You treated me as an equal partner when society said I should be helpless and dependent. You loved me for who I was, not who you wanted me to be. How could I regret any of that?" "I am glad," Samuel said, relief evident in his voice. "I have sometimes worried that I pushed too hard, moved too fast." "You moved at exactly the right pace," Clara assured him. "If you had waited, if you had held back, we might have missed our chance at this life. Timing is everything, and our timing was perfect." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl hooted in the distance. The wind rustled through the pine trees. Cattle lowed softly in their pastures. "Tell me again about the day we met," Clara said, though she knew the story by heart. Samuel smiled, recognizing her need to revisit their beginning. "I had just arrived in Montana, determined to start my own ranch. I heard in town about a widow who was selling cattle to pay her debts. Everyone was talking about how desperate you were, how the bank was about to foreclose. They said you were foolish for trying to manage the ranch alone, that you should just sell everything and move back east to family." "But you did not see it that way," Clara prompted. "No, I did not. I rode out to your place and saw a woman who was working harder than any 3 men I knew. I saw determination in your eyes and strength in the set of your shoulders. I saw someone who refused to give up, who would sell everything one piece at a time before she admitted defeat. And I thought, this is a woman worth knowing." "You bought every head of cattle at full price," Clara said, her voice soft with emotion. "Of course I did. They were good cattle, well cared for, and more than that, I wanted to help you. I wanted to see you succeed. Even then, before I knew you well, I wanted to be part of your story." Clara nestled closer to her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "You became the most important part of my story, you and the children and this life we have built together." The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew up and began making their own choices about their futures. Thomas Jr. married a sweet young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch and began managing the northern property, the same land where Clara had once struggled alone. Elizabeth married a horse trainer she met at a stock show in Helena and moved to a ranch 50 miles away, though she visited frequently with her growing brood of children. Matthew surprised everyone by not just studying veterinary medicine, but becoming one of the most respected animal doctors in Montana. He traveled throughout the territory, helping ranchers with difficult calvings, treating injured horses, and building a reputation for skill and compassion. He never married, claiming he was married to his work, but he doted on his nieces and nephews and always made time to visit his parents. Samuel and Clara grew older together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down but their love never diminishing. They gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Thomas Jr. and his family, content to serve as advisors and enjoy their grandchildren. One evening in the spring of 1915, Clara and Samuel sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 50s now, weathered by years of hard work but still strong and active. The ranch had expanded far beyond their original dreams, now encompassing 3,000 acres and running over 1,000 head of cattle. "We did it," Samuel said softly. "Everything we dreamed of, we accomplished." "We did more than that," Clara replied. "We created a legacy that will last for generations. Look at Thomas and Sarah running the North Ranch so well. Look at Elizabeth's beautiful horses. Look at Matthew helping ranchers all over Montana. We raised good children who are making their own marks on the world." "We did that together," Samuel said, taking her hand. "Every bit of it was a partnership. I could not have done any of it without you." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and scars of a lifetime of ranch work. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time you told me you loved me? You said you wanted to build something that would last beyond your own life." "I remember," Samuel said. "You did it, Samuel. This ranch, this family, this legacy will last for 100 years and beyond. Your grandchildren will tell their grandchildren about the cowboy who came to Montana with a dream and built something lasting." "Our grandchildren," Samuel corrected gently. "This is our legacy, Clara. You were there for every decision, every challenge, every triumph. This is as much yours as it is mine." They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Clara thought about the long journey from that terrible day, when she received the letter about Thomas's debts, to this peaceful evening surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. The cattle that she had sold one at a time, each one representing a small payment toward an overwhelming debt, had been the seed from which this great ranch grew. And the cowboy who had appeared at her darkest moment, offering full price and treating her with respect when others saw only weakness, had become the love of her life and her true partner in every sense of the word. In 1920, Clara and Samuel celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a grand party attended by over 100 people. Their children and grandchildren came, along with neighbors, ranch hands past and present, and friends from town. Tables were set up in the yard, loaded with food and drink. Music played and people danced and told stories late into the night. Thomas Jr. gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To my mother and father, who showed us all what true partnership looks like. Who taught us that success is not measured only in dollars and cattle, but in love and family and integrity. Who built not just a ranch but a legacy of kindness and hard work that will guide our family for generations to come." Clara wiped tears from her eyes as everyone drank to the toast. She looked at Samuel, who was also emotional, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. They had come so far together, overcome so much, built something far greater than either had imagined possible. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Clara and Samuel found themselves alone on the porch once more. It was their favorite place, the spot where they had shared so many conversations, so many quiet moments, so many sunsets. 37 years, Samuel said wonderingly. "It has gone by so quickly." "The best years of my life," Clara said without hesitation. "Even counting the hard times, the droughts and harsh winters and all the challenges we have faced, these have been the best years." "Mine too," Samuel agreed. He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss that still held passion after nearly 4 decades together. "I would do it all again, Clara. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you 1,000 times over." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the profound contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love well nurtured. "And I would choose you, Samuel Easton, every single time." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, filling the vast Montana sky. The ranch was quiet now, the cattle settled, the grandchildren asleep in various bedrooms throughout the house. But the peace was not empty. It was full of memories and love and the satisfaction of knowing they had built something lasting. Clara thought back to that desperate young widow who had stood on a porch not so different from this one, reading a letter that seemed to spell the end of everything. She had been so frightened, so overwhelmed, so certain that she could not survive what lay ahead. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. And it was all because she had refused to give up, had kept moving forward one cow at a time, and had been brave enough to accept help when a kind cowboy offered it. Samuel had bought every head at full price, treating her with fairness when he could have taken advantage of her desperation. That simple act of integrity had been the foundation for everything that followed. It had shown Clara that there were still good people in the world, still reasons to hope, still possibilities for happiness even in the darkest times. Years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. Great-grandchildren were born, adding another generation to the Easton legacy. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas Jr.'s management, adapting to new technologies and markets while maintaining the core values Samuel and Clara had established. In the summer of 1925, Clara fell ill with pneumonia. She was 67 years old and had always been strong and healthy, but the illness hit her hard. Samuel barely left her bedside, holding her hand and talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. The children came to visit, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to say goodbye, though everyone prayed for her recovery. After 2 weeks of fighting the illness, Clara began to improve. Her fever broke and her strength gradually returned. Samuel wept with relief when the doctor declared that she would make a full recovery. "I am not ready to lose you yet," Samuel told her, his voice breaking with emotion. "I need more time with you, Clara. I need many more years." Clara touched his face gently, moved by the depth of his love even after so many decades together. "I am not going anywhere yet, my love. I have more grandchildren to spoil and more sunsets to watch with you." She recovered fully, though the illness left her weaker than before. Samuel became even more protective, insisting that she rest more and leave all the heavy work to younger people. Clara chafed at the restrictions, but had to admit that she no longer had the energy she once did. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, in the midst of the Great Depression. The ranch was struggling along with everyone else in the country, cattle prices having dropped dramatically. But the Easton family had weathered hard times before, and they weathered this storm too, drawing on the lessons Samuel and Clara had taught them about perseverance and careful management. The anniversary celebration was smaller than their 37th had been, with money tight and times hard. But it was no less meaningful. Their children and grandchildren gathered to honor the couple who had built the foundation for their family's success. Elizabeth, now a grandmother herself, stood to give a speech. "My parents taught us that love is not just a feeling but an action. They showed us that true partnership means working together through good times and bad, supporting each other through every challenge. They demonstrated that integrity matters more than profit, and that treating people fairly is always the right choice even when it costs you something. These lessons have guided our family for 50 years, and they will continue to guide us for 50 more and beyond." Clara and Samuel held hands as they listened to their daughter's words, both moved by the recognition that their values had indeed been passed down through the generations. The ranch they had built was important, but the family they had raised was their true legacy. As Clara lay in bed that night, exhausted but happy from the day's celebration, Samuel curled up beside her. They were both old now, their bodies worn by decades of hard work and life, but their love was as strong as ever. "Thank you," Samuel whispered in the darkness. "For what?" Clara asked. "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For taking a chance on a cattle driver with big dreams. For being my partner in everything. For giving me a family and a life beyond anything I could have imagined. For 50 years of love and laughter and companionship." Clara turned to face him, reaching out to touch his weathered face. "Thank you for buying my cattle at full price. For seeing past my desperation to the person I really was. For loving me when I thought I would never love again. For building this life with me. For 50 years of being exactly the partner I needed." They kissed, a tender kiss between two people who had spent half a century loving each other. Then they settled into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the peace of knowing they had lived their lives well and loved deeply. Samuel Easton passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1936, at the age of 78. He had been in declining health for several months, but he remained alert and engaged with his family until the very end. On his last evening, he sat on the porch with Clara, watching the sunset one final time. "I've had a good life," he told her. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Thank you for sharing it with me." "It was my honor and my joy," Clara replied, tears streaming down her face because she knew this would be their last sunset together. That night he died as he had lived, quietly and with dignity, Clara's hand in his. The family gathered to mourn, and the funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Samuel Easton's integrity and kindness. Clara mourned deeply, but not desperately. She had been widowed before, and had learned that life continues even after devastating loss. She had 53 years of beautiful memories with Samuel, 3 children, 12 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. She had a ranch that bore testimony to their joint efforts, and a family that embodied their shared values. She lived for another 8 years, remaining active and involved with the ranch and her family. She took particular joy in telling her great-grandchildren stories about their great-grandfather, ensuring that Samuel's memory lived on vividly in the family's collective consciousness. On a warm June evening in 1944, Clara Fontaine Easton passed away at the age of 86, surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren. Her last words were reported to be, "Tell Samuel I am coming home." She was buried next to Samuel on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the vast Montana sky they had both loved. The double headstone bore a simple inscription: "Clara and Samuel Easton, partners in life, love, and legacy. Together they built something lasting." The ranch continued to prosper under the management of successive generations of Eastons. Thomas Jr.'s children took over when he retired, and their children after them. Each generation added their own innovations and improvements, but they all maintained the core values of integrity, hard work, and fair dealing that Samuel and Clara had established. The story of how the ranch began became family legend, passed down through the generations. Children grew up hearing about the desperate young widow who sold her cattle, one at a time, to pay her debts, and the honorable cowboy who bought every head at full price and eventually won her heart. The story became a touchstone for the family, a reminder that how you treat people in their darkest moments defines your character, and that love can bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. The small timber house where Clara had lived as Thomas's widow was preserved and eventually turned into a family museum, filled with artifacts and photographs documenting the ranch's history. Visitors could see Clara's mother's china, her father's books, and the original contract Samuel and Clara had signed at the lawyer's office, laying out the terms of their business arrangement that had blossomed into so much more. On the 100th anniversary of Samuel and Clara's first meeting in 1982, the family held a massive reunion at the ranch. Over 300 Easton descendants gathered to celebrate their ancestors and the legacy they had created. The ranch now encompassed over 10,000 acres and ran more than 3,000 head of cattle, making it one of the most successful operations in Montana. The current generation of Eastons, great-great-grandchildren of Samuel and Clara, told the old stories to the youngest children present. They spoke of debt and desperation, of courage and integrity, of a business arrangement that became a love story, of two people who built something lasting against all odds. As the sun set on that anniversary evening, painting the Montana sky in the same brilliant colors it had shown a century before, the family stood together on the hillside where Samuel and Clara were buried. They laid fresh flowers on the grave and gave thanks for ancestors who had taught them what really matters in life. One of the great-great-grandchildren, a girl of 8 named Clara after her famous ancestor, asked her grandfather, "Did they really love each other that much?" Her grandfather smiled and said, "Yes, they did." Samuel saw past Clara's desperation to her strength. He treated her fairly when he could have taken advantage, and she had the courage to accept his help and eventually his love. They built this ranch together, one decision at a time, one cow at a time, one day at a time. That is what real love looks like, not just feelings but actions, not just promises but follow through, not just dreaming together but working together to make those dreams real. The child nodded solemnly, taking in the wisdom. Around her, the extended family shared stories and laughter, bound together by the legacy of two people who had loved well and built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. The ranch that began with 43 head of cattle and a mountain of debt had become an empire. But more importantly, it had become a family united by shared values and the memory of the couple who had started it all. Samuel Easton, the cowboy who bought every head at full price, and Clara Fontaine Easton, the widow who paid her dead husband's debts, one cow at a time, and found love when she had stopped looking for it. Their story lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the truth that integrity matters, that kindness is never wasted, and that the greatest legacies are built not just with land and cattle, but with love and partnership and the willingness to help someone when they need it most. The Montana sunset faded into twilight, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The Easton family eventually dispersed back to their various homes and lives, but they carried with them the story and the values that had sustained their family for over a century. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirits of Samuel and Clara watched over the ranch they had built and the family they had raised, satisfied that their love and their legacy continued to flourish, as strong and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their beloved Montana home.